Welcome back to the Weird Teachers podcast. We are back with another episode and another guest. We are lucky enough to have Grant with us today. He's starting his third year of teaching. He teaches English and a couple of other classes. Those kind of change year to year. Welcome to the podcast. Before we get too far, we're going to start with our favorite question, which is, what is your best piece of teaching advice?
Yeah, so really glad to be here. My best piece of teaching advice would probably be from one of my mentor teachers who told me, "Hey, it is completely okay to ask those questions, even if they seem really silly or even outright dumb." I think it comes from a spot of like your first year of teaching, and you're asking the question day after day, so many times, and then you just feel like you're annoying them and bugging them, and they come back and say, no, you're completely fine. And so that's a real piece of relief and piece of advice too that is good for a first year teacher, which I was 2 years ago. Crazy that it's been that long.
You've come so far.
It goes by fast.
Yeah.
And I think that is easy to feel like you're inconveniencing whoever you're asking. And so it's like, you don't have to ask the same person every time.
Yes. And
shop around, go ask someone new.
We've discussed before, like, you feel like you should know it. And I feel like you're trying to prove that you're qualified because it is your first year. You're like, no, it was a good idea to hire me. You don't have to freak out. And so you want to act like you're qualified all the time, but like none of us know everything. And that's the biggest thing that I also tell new teachers is like, I'm literally here to answer. I'm here to teach math. And immediately after that, I'm here to answer your questions. Mm-hmm. So interrupt me.
And even as only a third year teacher, I have new staff asking me questions at the district, and it's, you're like, whoa, can I answer that and feel confident in my ability to help them, even though then you realize, yes, I actually can help them.
Right. I know some things now. I don't need a phone a friend every time. I just need phone friends sometimes.
Love that. So Grant and I are unique in the fact that we're actually related. We're cousins. Second, I guess.
Yeah, I get technically.
Is that how that works? Yeah,
well,
down the line.
Maybe third. It's either way.
Something like that. So a lot of people don't know that because we have different last names, but we spend Thanksgiving and Christmas lunch or dinner usually together, some sort of combination. And we both actually went back and taught in the district that we attended as students, which is pretty unique, I feel like. So that's kind of what we are going to talk about today. We're going to ask Grant some questions about what that looks like and his thoughts, and we'll go from there. So first, why don't you tell us what inspired you to become a teacher in the first place?
Well, I feel like I kind of have that cliche answer where I say, oh, I always wanted to be a teacher, but it really is true. But it comes from a lot of different areas of my life. And I love that question because it does have so much weight for me. But I feel, okay, with my sister being just a little bit younger than me, we were always doing the classic, playing school at home, super fun. Growing up in elementary, I read the Harry Potter series, and that was a big deal because then I was saying, why not just play regular school when you can do something like play Hogwarts? True. And I can be with my cousins who are about the same age and we all like the same things. And, I'm teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts or Charms. And
I love that.
We go outside and we play potions and herbology.
Sign me up.
So that was really cool. Just growing up with that mentality. Second point I want to make, I never had a bad English teacher at the district I was at.
That's impressive.
Yes. I mean, and you looking back, elementary, middle school, high school, never had an English teacher that I thought, ooh, that was a rough year. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, there's the ones that you might consider to be better than, a different one. But overall, fantastic English teacher. So that was a real big influence. Third point, a lot of my family grew up in education. And so our running joke has always been, we could open up our own school. And in fact, when you look at even like the retired members of my family, it could really literally be true. I mean, it wouldn't be a huge school, but it would be well enough off. So that's true. That's true. That's very true. So yeah.
I feel like that has a big influence if you have a lot of family teaching.
I think so too.
Well, and it's nice because you have people that you can talk to, and they get it, because people who are not in education, like if you marry somebody not in education,
me,
there are just certain things that they might empathize, but they don't actually know what that feels like. They can't relate to it without having experienced that for themselves. So
my husband literally looked at me today and was like, how do you know what to teach on which day? Like, how do you decide what order to go in? And I was like, you're so right. That's literally what I talked to a new teacher about today, is like, where do you start and then where do you go? Because once you got that down, it's okay. But when you're starting, that would be overwhelming.
Actually, I just show up and decide what I feel like teaching that day. And
I draw a number out of a hat, and then I crack open the textbook and I teach it.
And then I ask the kids, what do you want to talk about today? Better question.
Sounds like unschooling, which sounds like a thing for another episode,
right?
to be honest.
Right.
For sure.
Back to Grant. How did you end up teaching in the district you grew up in? And was that something you wanted to do? Has that been like always the goal, or did that just happen?
Honestly, bottom line, yes.
Okay.
I think I'm a very no change type of guy.
Okay.
And change scares me, which it does a lot of people. But I did, I will give myself a little bit of credit. I interviewed at a couple other districts before I ended up where I'm at, in my hometown where I grew up. But I almost kind of knew I didn't want to be there, and it just didn't even feel right in the interview.
Right.
And it's kind of hard to, walk into that interview and then you end up just kind of having to say like, I'll get back to you, but you know that you're going to say no, which is honestly a little awkward. But then when I did get to interview at the district where I grew up and graduated from, that was really surreal, and it felt exactly right. And I haven't regretted that decision as of this moment. So that's really cool too. Yeah.
I think that's important for anybody, even if you're not interviewing where you went to school, that you just kind of can feel in the culture and the people that you interact with. I mean, just as much as they're interviewing you, you also are trying to figure out if it's a good fit for you and that's where you want to be. So I feel like that's true too, which I kind of was the opposite. I mean, I never like set out to go back to the district. That wasn't necessarily my plan, because I wasn't even living in the area when I started teaching. And I was asked about coming, and I just was like, for my first year, I think I just need to be somewhere else. And so I did that, and then I just wanted to be closer to home. So
makes sense.
That's how I ended up back. But I totally get that. And then it was nice because I already knew all these people, and it was kind of cool. So
yeah, it's homey.
Right.
Yeah.
You already
Which
know
is
how
nice.
things work for the most
You know
part.
where the copier is?
Yes, I did.
I do.
On every single campus, I knew
Yes.
where the copy machine was.
Me too. I always like to tell this quick story of, I did actually take a quick interview process at the elementary, which is not where I wanted to be at all.
I don't remember that happening.
It did happen.
Did we know about that?
And so I don't know, but the principal is leading me around the school, and she's being really nice about it, but she's like, here's the 5th grade hallway and here's the 1st grade. And I'm like, just nodding and being like, yeah, as if that wasn't exactly where it was when I was in school there in elementary. But yeah, and so
paint the walls.
Yeah, but it was still fun to be able to do that, because I actually did interview at the elementary. I interviewed at the middle school, and that's where I was officially hired. But then right smack dab in the middle of summer school, the high school called and came knocking, and I knew I wanted to take that shot at the high school campus. So yeah.
I don't remember you interviewing at the middle. And for context, the high school he's currently working at, he's student taught at, and that's where I work. So like I remember that process for you, and like hoping that we could get you a spot on our campus and like a place that you would fit in. And I don't remember you were looking at elementary. That's panicky.
Yeah, it was a little panicky, but I was willing to take a chance there. But hey, it worked out. I'm at the high school and I love it. So.
For sure. How do you think your experiences having been a student in the district influence the way that you teach the kids there?
Ooh, I definitely think there are so many opportunities for me to go to a former teacher that I had in high school, or even in middle school and elementary if I happen to see them around, the district. But being able to go to a former teacher and say, hey, I remember this specific project that we did in your class all those years ago, or really not all that, those many years ago, but, a few years ago. But then still being able to say, like, I really enjoyed that. I thought it was engaging as a student. I would love to try something very similar in my English classroom. How did you do it? What are the details? Right. And that doesn't even go for just like physical assignments. It's, kind of that advice still too, where I can still be able to go like, hey, I remember you literally giving me advice on college. I need help now in this area of my life or teaching. And so that's really neat to be able to do. And it's almost like you never really left, which, not to say that I'm not at a different spot, but being able to continue your education with your former high school teachers is a really neat experience that not everybody gets, but it's cool when it can happen and you're in a good spot for it to happen. So
absolutely.
And I love that you're already comfortable talking to those people and getting information from those people. Like they already were mentors in your life. So now keeping them as mentors just seems like a great move. As long as everyone can adjust to you being the adult in the situation.
Yes. And recognize those new roles and hats that you're wearing, and you're not their student anymore, so
you don't need them all the time. And sometimes they need you. And I feel like that's the weirdest part of like the switch is that sometimes you do know more things because you're younger and you might be more in touch with technology and or something else. It could be anything, but like you might have new ideas to bring to the table, and like as long as everyone's taking those from you, that's a great place to be.
For sure.
Do you think there's particular parts of the district's educational approach or like the community values that they have? Like I know our community is it's tight. Like people are close.
Yeah.
Does that influence the way that you teach the kids?
Most definitely. I know just this last year, it's really neat to be able to, I had a student and I actually graduated with an older sibling of theirs. And so that's kind of neat to be able to say like, I honestly remember when you were born and, like this friend telling me like, oh yeah, my new sibling is born and here, they are. And you're like, oh, how fun. And then you're like, oh, I'm teaching you now. And so that's really neat. And that kind of goes into that community aspect too, where you do know so many people. As far as like a district, I do feel that we're, at least concerned on some level of like making proactive citizens. And so I think that's one of I use that word all the time, whether we're using it in just like a, casual setting, honestly, because the kids start to use that vocabulary too.
Right.
But being able to make proactive citizens, I think is really important in general, of course, but something I strive to do because I feel like that's something that our community needs, our school needs, everybody needs. So I guess that would be probably my main answer for that. But I do think that just the whole community vibe is really important to our school and shows. So.
I feel like it's more of a family vibe than a school vibe, which is nice.
Yes.
Like, I know your mom, and I know your dad, and I know all of your siblings. And whenever you have one and you either went to school with mom or dad, I guess we're not old enough for that.
No,
but I've heard teachers saying that, it's like, I went to school with your parents and now I'm teaching you. Or even I went to school with your parents and now it's their grandchild.
Yes.
I've heard like my mom have that experience. And
or our superintendent has like people working under him that he's in class.
Yes. Yeah.
That now are real adults that are employed here, and it's just kind of crazy to think about.
And even for me, it's like I know your parents and I'm having you in class. It almost feels illegal. I had one come to meet the teacher, and I looked at her mom, and I'm like, how is she allowed to be in this grade? Well, that doesn't even seem like the math is mathing to me, but it was. She was old enough. She was in but it's crazy.
I did like a long-term sub in my middle school, like after I finished, and I had a 7th grader who was my literal best friend's youngest sister, and I was just baffled that she was old enough that I could be teaching her in a 7th grade class. And it was strange at first. Like you said, they come in and you're like, oh, I literally saw you in diapers, and I remember when you learned to walk, and now I'm trying to teach you intro algebra. That's crazy.
We've come full circle.
We've come so far.
Yes.
But it is unique, and it's cool that you have that with so many students.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel like the district has changed since you were a student?
Oh, in a lot of ways, it's very, very similar. And that can be a good and a bad thing.
Right.
There's those good parts that you're thinking, hey, this is how we used to do it. And it does still work. And it's still being, productive for the district as a whole. Now, of course, then you have the opposite end where there are the bad things and you're like, ooh, we've literally been doing it like that,
still doing that
forever. And we probably need to try something different because it didn't even work when I was in, school.
I feel like that's where I always end up asking a lot of questions because I'm a transplant, and so I'm like, why are we doing this?
Yep.
Someone goes, we've always done it that way, and I often answer that depending on who it is and what our relationship looks like. I'm like, that's my least favorite answer.
Yep. Me too.
Tell me why. And, just
yep.
No one wants that. It's like, I just need to know why we made that decision, and then I can rest about it. That's for sure.
Yeah. And of course, like your kind of textbook answer, but of course, COVID changed so much.
Absolutely.
Like even one small thing that I can think of right off the top of my head is when I was like a freshman, sophomore, we had class sets of like Chromebooks. So you weren't getting your own, you weren't one-on-one as we use that lingo. And now these kids all have a Chromebook and they're one-on-one and they are expected to take care of it, keep up with it, keep it charged, all those good things. And so now it's so much easier to, of course, integrate that into your classroom than even the, not so long ago years of me being in high school. And that was like, hey, this class is renting out the Chromebook cart today. No one else can have it because this class is using it, that kind of situation. Right. So that's even like a small thing and not even that, I wouldn't even necessarily consider that a culture thing in my mind, but it kind of is in a way because the kids are so used to, hey, your Chromebook is literally a school essential at this point. So,
well, and it's just really become the norm, like you said, since COVID. And I would be shocked if I went to a district to interview and they told me that they weren't one-to-one or that they didn't have a device. I would be like, you need to get there.
I have shocking news for you then, which is that another district in our area that's way bigger than ours with way more money than ours is not one-to-one. Because a lot of our one-to-one funding comes from our Title I status. According to the person that works at that district, I obviously haven't done our it's like that's not my business, but
I guess that makes sense, but I just feel like
there's still
junior high and high school, they need to have that available to them. And even some places, it's not that they're checking them out to take home, but every class has a cart or every student is able to use one in every class should they need it.
Right.
Whether or not they're using that every single day. But especially with all of the state testing and all of that moving to online platforms and they're not writing anymore, they're typing.
Right.
They need to be doing that and getting in the habit so that when it comes to testing time, it's not foreign to them.
Well, and I guess I haven't even thought about that, but I don't know how you do all the testing. I guess you have to stagger it if you don't have enough Chromebooks because they share one cart per grade. So the teachers can take turns. There's 4 teachers in the little like cohort, I want to call it, and they have a cart and they have to share it between the 4 of them. And that blew my mind when we were talking about it because which this is upper elementary, but it's old enough that they're taking tests and they're typing and they're doing the things. Like I feel like they should have access to more technology than they do. So it just
and even upper elementary
baffles me.
Here, that's multiple state tests. I mean, and they pretty much all
have typing,
have some kind of some sort of like response.
You just have to know how the interface works.
I would not want to be the testing coordinator wherever that is.
No, I wouldn't either.
Wow.
But
bless him.
On the note of technology, I feel like technology has even changed so much since you were in school in our district.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like there's programs that we have now for you to use, and we're like, hey, have you tried this? And you didn't use it as a student, so you're like, I don't know what it is, but sure.
Yeah. Well, and I'm honestly probably a weird duck in terms of being a young teacher who kind of skirts away from technology. And part of that is, you know, like with AI and the writing portion of my job, because I do teach English. And so sometimes I think I get in the habit of just more of a fear mode, and I'm afraid of that. And so the way I combat against that is to literally just print and use paper, which, you know, sorry, environment, but it's just, it becomes easier in the moment, which isn't, you know, a good answer for that. But, you know, it's kind of just how I've dealt with issues. And I teach at the freshman level. And so sometimes I honestly don't give them the benefit of the doubt. And I'm like, I feel like you might do something I don't want you to do and try to cheat or use other resources that aren't necessarily the best, you know, use for that point in time. And so I do kind of just be, you know, hand up, slide them a piece of paper and say, here you go. I'm here in the classroom with you. Try something. I dare you. And I don't say that to be ugly, just, you know, that's just kind of how I roll right now. And that's my way I do it, I guess.
Well, and you're building foundational skills with them at that level. Like, it's not, they're still learning so much that if they're cheating their way through that process, they're going to have such big gaps when they get to the next level.
Absolutely.
That's going to be a problem. And I'm pretty sure you transition them. I feel like before your test,
I do actually. Yes.
You have them typing more. So, like, they're still getting that preparation.
Yes. And that is, I guess, one good thing I do try to do with that sort of thing, since they are going to be taking this, you know, state test online, and there's no other way around that. I mean, you're not going to avoid it by any means. So you do have to say, okay, let's look at this program. Let's do work on our typing skills with our journals and whatnot. So yeah, there are of course things I do try to help in that process, but maybe not as good as I should be.
But as much as I love my Kindle, there's something about holding a real book.
For sure.
That's just different.
Yeah.
And you're teaching an English class. Like some of it just is
back to the
coziness of having a book that you
can. I agree with you on that for sure.
Oh, and as far as essays and things like that go, I very much am of the belief that as much as they need to be, let's go back to elementary. As much as they need to be learning those keyboarding skills and how to use the computer, they do still need to have the handwriting piece and things like that, because you don't want that to become obsolete. And then, I mean, now, like, cursive is basically non-existent. I feel like people our age or close to us are one of the last ones that actually had that instruction in school.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to become the norm where, I mean, because kids have such bad handwriting now.
It's so bad.
I mean, in upper elementary, middle school kids, and you can barely read it because
upper high schoolers that I literally give graph paper to so that they can, like, put a number in each box and try to organize what they're writing, because I can't read it and then I can't track anything that they're doing.
And it's terrifying. And some people do just naturally have really poor handwriting, but
yes,
this many shouldn't be happening. And it's crazy. And that's when I was teaching first grade, I was so worried about that. I was like, no, we got to focus on the handwriting, but you also have to still hit that technology piece. And I don't know, it has to be such a good happy balance. I feel like
so much at once.
It is. It's a lot.
But I don't know. You're facing them. You're facing the challenges.
I try.
And speaking of challenges, do you feel like you have different challenges because you're in a district that you grew up in? As far as, like, how people treat you, how people in the community see you, things like that.
Yes, I would say so. I think, you know, where my dad works, a lot of people know him. And so it's kind of one of those things like, oh yeah, that's so-and-so's son. He works at the high school. And so even just that thought alone does occasionally freak me out. And my dad is involved in the school in a capacity. And so that's also another level of added weight that I'm just always thinking about. And I try not to, because you try to be, you know, you try to be confident and you try to say, no, I'm my own person and blah, blah, blah. But you're like, the reality is that's how people are going to see you and look at you and even maybe judge you if that's what it comes down to for them. I would say one thing, like, just I do encounter every now and then, is they expect you to be the same person that you were in high school or middle school or elementary, whenever you had them. And then you realize, like, no, I, you know, graduated and I went to college, and not that, you know, necessarily means like I did a 180, but it does mean that there's going to be parts of me that aren't exactly the same, you know,
Sure.
and stuff like that. So I do encounter that I think more often than not sometimes, where people expect me to behave, and not that I'm, acting.
Do what you're told.
Yeah, right. But I think, sometimes they're like, oh, I wouldn't have expected him to maybe say that. And,
Right.
not, and I'm not saying it's a rude instance or anything, but like, oh, okay. Yeah, this isn't the same,
You've grown
15-year-old. Yeah, exactly.
You have more
Yeah, you're an
opinions
adult.
and
Yes.
you've lived some life. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the natural process.
I think, some of that does come from, I'm not necessarily going to roll over like they thought maybe I would, because
Right.
they had me as a student.
Right.
And so that can be, awkward at times, but that hasn't happened a lot, I'll say. But it does, so it's still there.
I wouldn't have, I guess, had to think about it because I did come in and like they didn't know me in high school.
Right.
Right, yeah.
And in high school, I couldn't have talked in front of a room full of people, and now that's literally what I
Yep.
do for a living. And in high school, I never would have asked why it was good enough for us to say that we've always done it. I wouldn't
Yes.
have questioned that. Just lay down and let that steamroll right over. I'm not like that anymore, and that's a good thing.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know, because in school, my mom was a teacher. And so I always, even then, kind of felt this pressure of if I do something wrong, she's going to know. And
Yes.
like, I can't mess up. And so I kind of had that pressure on me growing up. But now it's like the same thing. All these people already know me. I just want to do a good job. I don't want them to
I want to be perfect.
Yes, I want them to be
Yes,
proud of me. I
for
don't
sure.
want to be a disappointment. But even just like to the point of it being funny is when we go on our conference, and other than Molly, they're both teachers that I had at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And the first place we go to, I really wanted to order a marg, and I was like, I can't do that in front of my teachers.
And I didn't know Stacey yet, so I wasn't going to order one because I was like, oh my gosh, what if no one else wants one and then I'm the only one? And that'll be embarrassing. And then I think I'm an alcoholic, and I just
For sure.
have had a long day,
Oh.
and it's a Mexican restaurant, and I just
Yes.
would like a margarita.
It goes so well with Mexican food, but it's also like, this is a work trip. Are we allowed to do this? Like, I'm not at school. It's totally fine. But it kind of feels wrong because these are your teachers. And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
eventually we got to where it wasn't weird, and it's fine. And we're all grown-ups.
We're
But
adults now. And like, I would say that the other women that we go with are good at that.
right.
Like, they're so good at looking at you and being like, you're an adult now.
Yes.
Stop
And
freaking out.
they see you how you are, not
Yes.
as, oh, you're
Yeah.
just a little second grader.
They're very good
Yeah.
at that. It's just getting out of your own head of expecting someone to treat you like
Yes.
For sure.
that.
Well, because you remember what it was like to sit in that class and do those
Yes,
projects.
exactly.
And they were the role model, and you just have to learn, I don't know, a new relationship with that person as an
Mhm.
adult. So it's kind of cool.
It is.
Hindsight, but it can be really
It
uncomfortable
was
at first.
one of the nerve-wracking things about that first trip, I think, was just like that transition for you, which I had no idea. I just didn't really know what I was going with. I knew that Amber was really nice to me all the time.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, everyone else should be fine, or she wouldn't have brought them.
We're gonna make it.
It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Is it weird to have colleagues who are your teachers?
Oh, yeah. Yes, definitely. Now, of course, there's the ones that you're, as we've discussed, kind of way more comfortable with. And so that weirdness is just absolutely gone. And you don't
Mhm.
even have to really even think about that at this point. But there are, I will say, even, where I'm at now, at the campus I've been at for 3 years, there are some that I, just wouldn't engage in a conversation like that with, because it's so hard to take the teacher out of them. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's more of my view of them.
Right.
And I still can't even call them by their first name.
I was going to ask that
Yes.
specifically. How was the transition to first names? I also feel like I'm different in that, like, just where I was raised. Like, first names are way more common. So it throws me off if the kids aren't around and one of you calls me by my last name. I'm like, are we not friends? Do you
Right.
not
Right.
actually like
And see, growing up in the South, to me, like, that's such a respect thing. Like,
right.
Yes.
ma'am, Mrs., Mr., Miss, whatever.
Yeah.
And
I'm not used to that. I
Yeah.
don't really
Yeah.
like to be called ma'am. And it freaks me out when people use
Right.
my last name and it's not like a room full of students.
Yes.
And so I was going to ask if the transition to first names was weird.
Yes. And
Yeah.
you can, if you were to pay attention to me when I do see these people in the hallway or talk to them, you'll automatically know based on how I'm going to address them. And you're, oh, Grant's not super comfortable with calling them by their first name, because I literally won't. And it's so hard.
It just feels wrong
Yeah,
because
it does.
you called them that for so long.
Yeah.
And we talk about Amber a lot, but I'm going to use her as another example because I kept calling her by her professional teacher name. And she's like, you work here now. And
You
Yes.
can call me by
you
my
can call
first
me by my
name.
first
Yep.
name. I'm like, it feels wrong, but
Oh.
I'll try.
And you know what's so funny about that? Your own mom, I would not call by her first name, even though I probably would at a family function.
Right.
But at school, I'm like, hey, by your official, teacher name or whatever.
For sure.
And it's like, okay. And she even told me, Grant, you do not have to call me that. And I'm
You're
like, I know, but
allowed.
it's so weird. And
Yeah. No,
now I will, because we did have that conversation. But for the longest time, I just wouldn't even call my own cousin by her first name. So
I think some of that is the vibe your mom gives off.
yeah,
Because
for sure.
I
Yeah.
have used her first name because I know her outside of school because we're
Right.
friends. And so like
Mhm.
I usually call her by her first name. And if I'm talking to someone, I have referenced her before and people have no idea who I'm talking about. And if
Right.
I use her last name, they're like, oh, okay.
That lady.
I didn't know her
Yeah.
first name. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like I just feel like she gives off an air of importance in like the best way. She's not
Yes, for
she's not
sure.
in an arrogant way, but in like a
She's
you're
definitely
like,
going to give you
okay,
both a hard time about this,
that's
by the
fine.
way.
She just seems
I
like
can't
she knows
wait.
what she's doing all the time.
But
Yeah.
I
People
do
respect that.
think kind of along with that, for me, it depends on like what their role is or like what they're talking. Like
Yeah.
our superintendent, I'm like, no, like you're the highest person in the district. I can't call you by your first name.
Yeah.
Even I wouldn't call him by his first name.
Exactly.
And
it's
I'm calling like pretty much anyone below him I will call by their first name without even flinching
Right.
because that's how I am.
It's almost like
programmed.
Mr. President,
Yeah. You need both.
I can't call you by your first name. It's just wrong.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's
I'm
a weird
glad
adjustment.
we're all in agreement on that, and it wasn't just me.
No, it's not just you.
Oh.
So what would you say are some of the most rewarding aspects of teaching in your hometown?
Oh, like we've kind of discussed, the community aspect, of course, being able to, go outside of the school building and still maintain like a professional role in the community, but also being able to, joke around and talk to their parents, or even siblings or whatever, that matter is. And, you see them at the grocery store, which is always a weird experience, as a teacher, because you either have the kids that are like literally going to dart down the aisle so they don't look at you, or the ones that are literally like, what's up? And just, scream your
Embarrass
name.
you.
Yeah, embarrass you in the grocery store. But, even like, at church and stuff like that, you have to see them. And it's almost like rude or weird if you don't talk to them
Right,
at those types of events. So yeah, but it's really cool to be able to do that all the time.
That is nice. My favorite is when they don't come to school, but then they're at the grocery store or the sporting event, and it's like,
Exactly. Yeah.
feeling better?
I thought you had the flu.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Crazy, I must have read that email wrong. But
Yep.
I'm getting a chicken noodle soup.
I'm just getting some fresh air.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like that leads right into how do you engage with the local community outside of your classroom? Like, are there certain things that you try to do to keep yourself involved?
I would say, for me personally, church is a big aspect of my life, of course. And so that's where I would probably, answer that question coming from, and being able to say like, hey, here I am. You can find me here on a Sunday morning, but even, the church that I am a part of and a member of, we have one of the biggest Wednesday night programs for kids. And so it's really cool. And even if I teach at the high school, but it's even cool to see those elementary kids and middle school kids come to something like Wednesday night church and be able to interact with them there. And it's not the same, vibe, of course. You're in a classroom versus in a classroom at church, which doesn't sound that different maybe to outside people. But when you haven't experienced that, it's wild. Kids are going to act so different for you at someplace like church. It's sometimes almost like a battle you're constantly fighting, but in the best way, because it's for a good reason. But yeah, I would say probably that is my best community outreach, other than just, you see them around town and that sort of stuff. But yeah.
Well, and that'll be cool a few years down the road when you have those kids in class.
Yes, for sure.
You've already got a relationship.
You've already had that foundation laid. And
yeah, just today I decided, because we've been in discussion with it at church, and so just tonight I decided that I was going to do a first grade Bible And I'm like, because I was doing upper, like middle school age.
Mm-hmm.
And I told, the pastor, I was like, I don't think I can continue to do that just because it is very similar to what I already do during the day. I'm like, I don't mind littles. I like them. And I only see them for 20 minutes, mind y'all. So it's like, that's nothing compared to what an elementary teacher has to deal with. But I absolutely love that age group for 20 minutes. And then, we move into like music and missions. And so music, you're singing. I don't actually need you to engage as if I'm teaching you your ABCs. So it's an entirely different environment, but it's awesome for me to be able to experience that because I'm not with them on a day-to-day basis like some teachers are. So
for sure. They're very sweet and
yes,
want to be with you and give you hugs at
it's
that
awesome.
age. So
yeah,
it's
cool.
Very different from freshmen and 8th graders.
Yes, definitely.
So
yes.
It's nice to mix it up a little bit.
Yep.
What advice would you give to someone who is considering going back and teaching where they went to school?
My first just kind of comment was like, it's definitely a personal preference because not everybody can do that. Like even you said, Stacey, you're like, no, I want to try something different to start off my teaching career.
Right.
And like, obviously that's totally valid. And I think it's kind of in my opinion, it's the same way, the opposite way. Like if you do want to go back to your hometown, I don't see anything wrong with it, but heck, I did it. So I wouldn't, but I think there's always those cautions that you have to have based on my personality. Amazing decision, wouldn't change what I've done. And it's not that I'll never go somewhere outside of my hometown. At least, I don't want to say never because you never know, right?
Right.
That's kind of just goes with the territory. But I do think that, like I already mentioned again, people do expect you to be the same person that you were when you graduated and walked across that stage or whatever. And so that's one caution that I do give, because you will have to go against that and combat against that. And even if you don't, there's other issues that may arise. But, obviously, like I said, great decision for me. I think it's totally a personality thing that some people can handle and some people might need to steer away from that, at least for the beginning part of their teaching career. So, and people might say that about me. They might say, well, maybe Grant should have gone somewhere different. And I think that's a totally valid opinion.
Nobody's saying that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So anyway, but I am glad to be in my hometown. So that's really cool.
Well, and I think from the school side of it, I feel like schools really like when alumni come back. And it's like, okay, that's just showing that the products of our system, if they still want to be here, we're doing something right. And so I feel like that's kind of a testament to them and to those teachers that we had. Oh, we did something right if they still want to be here and they don't want to be someplace else. And I will say for me, it's just something kind of funny because there would be teachers talking and, not around kids or anything like that. But it was something, I don't even remember exactly what it was, but it was kind of funny and grown up talk. And I'll just leave it at that. But it was in front of who was my high school principal. And he was like, you can't say that to me in front of her because she was one of my students and my cheerleaders.
And it's weird.
We can't be having this conversation right now.
That's funny.
And to me, it was just really funny. But I could see how that was kind of uncomfortable for him as well. It's like, no, she's not old enough to be hearing this conversation.
She's not big enough yet.
Yeah. One more quick thing that is great about coming back to where you grew up. You don't have to change a whole lot of your wardrobe because you still have the same colors that you wore in high school. So that's fun.
The district we're in, the school color that we have is actually the color of our rival from high school.
Oh,
so
right.
That must be my little
yes, that's hard.
And put it on to work because it just feels wrong.
Yeah.
I also feel like if you're coming back to the district, it's more investment in the district. Like you are invested in the community and the growth because your family is there, you're from there, you've seen how you came out of the school as a product of it, so
absolutely
you're going to be wanting to make it better.
And I even remember saying that in my application that I'm from here and I wanted to give back to the school. And I think that is, really cool. And for me, it was never that I necessarily wanted to leave, but, some good advice I got was just to not close any doors. And
yes,
for some people, it's just going to work out like that. And for some people, they're only at one district their entire teaching career, and that's totally okay too. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But I think it's just kind of depends on how you want to grow and what you want to do and what opportunities are available in the district. So
Right.
Yes.
Now I think our last question for you today, Grant, is what are you most proud of in your career so far?
You know, I think I could answer that literally based on an experience I had 2 days ago, because we're in our in-service. It's just teachers back at the school, but there are other students, just specifically the cheerleaders working in the
Yeah.
hallways.
They're decorating it like crazy.
Yes,
and
it looks
needs
so
to
good.
happen.
It's
so
so
cute.
awesome.
I love that.
But I have seen some of them, and just seeing them even light up and it's like you don't want to have this like big ego about it,
Right.
but you're like, I'm so excited to see you, and they echo the same sentiment.
Yes.
And they're like, they want to know about your summer too, and you're like, whoa, no, I don't. You don't. I mean, I did nothing, so I just want to know about you, and you're just
Right.
excited to
Yeah.
be in their presence again. And then it just gets you super pumped for the school year. But I would just say that, that comes from relationships, that comes from that building of having them as students and just interacting with them on a daily basis. And so that's what I think I'm most proud of, is just being able to have that and see those kids grow and become awesome human beings. So that's really cool.
It is so cool. And I've had this similar experiences because
Yes.
we're on the same campus, and I just feel like that's the part of our job where we're trying to make them people
Yep.
that are productive citizens in society. As you
Yep.
said, like
Yep.
you want to make them good people. And so them coming up and asking me about my summer and being excited to see me makes me feel like we're putting good people out.
Yes, because it's like,
you know how to have a conversation.
Like it's so small,
care.
but you genuinely care about what I was doing, and you are hyping me up. I was like hanging things up today
Yes.
and looking overwhelmed, and a couple of them went by and they're like, it's looking great, you're doing fine. Take a deep breath. Maybe go for a walk. And I was like, okay, I feel like I've done good things for you because you're echoing that back to me. And
Yes,
it's the
for
same.
sure.
Returning that energy is huge.
Yes.
For sure. Well, Grant, thank you for being here. I feel like
Thanks for having me. It was a super cool
you
experience.
shared a lot of wisdom. I love
Wow.
that. I mean, I can relate, so
Yeah.
I feel like this was really cool for me too.
A
But
good
Yeah.
experience for me.
I think
Yeah.
others will enjoy, especially if they can't relate to that. Just kind
Yes.
of having some insight to it. So
Super cool. Love what we do. Wouldn't trade it for anything.
Same.
we appreciate
Don't
you being
talk to
here.
us in October.
Ask us at the beginning. of school.
Yeah.
It's really only 2 bad months.
Yeah.
I'd say you don't make decisions in October and April,
I love that.
but the rest of the year, absolutely.
Yep.
Love what we do. For sure. But thanks for being here.
Yep.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.